Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories, and don't forget to subscribe. It all started on a random Tuesday night. I had been scrolling through my phone, mindlessly, when a notification popped up. It was one of those random social media recommendations, an account I hadn't noticed before. The name was unfamiliar, the pictures were bold, but nothing seemed too out of the ordinary at first. I was half paying attention, my mind preoccupied with the usual distractions of everyday life. But something about the profile struck me. The photo, the expression, the way he looked. Wait, the name clicked. It was my husband's nickname. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the image, now realizing this wasn't some random stranger. This was him. There he was, staring back at me in ways I had never imagined. The familiar smile, the way his hair was styled just so. But what stood out the most? The context, the angle, the setting. He was wearing nothing but a towel, positioned provocatively in a way that made my stomach twist with confusion. Could this be some kind of parody account? A joke? I clicked through to see more. It wasn't a mistake. These weren't accidental uploads. He had a full collection of photos, each more intimate than the last. I couldn't understand it. He'd always been so private. How was this possible? I stared at the screen, unable to make sense of it. I felt a tightness in my chest, my pulse quickening. This wasn't just a fluke, I realized. It was deliberate. I had no idea how to process this. He had a hidden life. A life I had no part of. A life I never suspected. I sat there, numb, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Each post felt like it was mocking me. The comments, the way people were responding to him, it felt wrong. I couldn't even comprehend why he'd never told me. He'd always been so open with everything. Or so I thought. My mind raced, filling with questions I didn't want to ask. Why did he do this? Why was he sharing himself with the world in such an intimate way? Was he trying to hurt me? I clicked through the photos again, my fingers shaking. Some of them were tamer, but others were explicit. My stomach churned. Did he want attention? Or was there something more? I had never seen him like this. I didn't know this side of him. I kept scrolling, unwilling to stop, even as my heart sank deeper. I didn't know how much more I could take. My phone buzzed in my hand, snapping me back to reality. A message from him. Hey, what's up? The message was so normal, so typical of him. It made me feel sick. How could he be so calm? Did he have any idea what I just found? I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I checked his profile again. This time, something caught my eye. His bio. It said, "Thanks for your support, babe." My world tilted. It was like a punch to the gut. The realization hit me harder than anything else so far. He wasn't just posting for strangers. He was posting for me too. He had kept this secret for months. The worst part? I had unknowingly been his biggest fan. I had supported him all along without even knowing it. I had no idea what to do next. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship was crumbling in front of me. My hands felt clammy, my thoughts racing as I tried to find some kind of explanation. But there was none, just a dark, cold reality staring back at me from the screen. The next few minutes felt like a blur. I closed the app, but the image of his face, so familiar yet so foreign, wouldn't leave my mind. My heart pounded. I had to confront him. But how? How could I even begin to ask about this? How could I bring up something so intimate, so private, when I hadn't even been given the chance to understand it? I stood up from the couch, pacing the room. My thoughts were a jumbled mess. I could feel my anxiety building, my hands shaking. Was he doing this for validation? For money? What was the reason? How long had this been going on? The worst part? I felt betrayed. Betrayed in a way I couldn't even articulate. I thought we were open with each other. I thought he trusted me enough to share everything. But he didn't. He kept this hidden, even though I had unknowingly been contributing to his success. I had liked his posts, commented on some of his pictures, sent him encouraging messages. I had been a part of this, without even realizing it. The anger started building up inside me, mixing with the hurt, until it felt like I couldn't breathe. How could he have been so careless, so secretive? I thought I knew him. I thought we were in this together. But now I was questioning everything. What else was he hiding from me? I needed answers, but I was scared of what those answers might be. I had to know. I had no choice but to confront him. I didn't know how to approach him. What could I possibly say? The anger and confusion inside me made it hard to think straight. I wanted to scream, to demand answers right then and there, but I knew it would only make things worse. Instead, I waited until he came home. The evening was dragging on, and every second felt like an eternity. When he finally walked through the door, I froze. He looked so normal, so unaware of the storm brewing inside me. He kissed me on the cheek, as usual. I could barely respond. My body felt stiff, tense, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. How could he act like nothing was wrong? How could he be so unaffected? I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't find the words. But when I saw him start to relax, take off his shoes, and settle into his routine, I snapped. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low but firm. He stopped, his eyes narrowing slightly. "About what?" His tone was casual, like he didn't have a care in the world. That only made my anger grow. "About your secret," I replied, biting back tears. His face shifted, just a little. The calm demeanor he usually carried faltered, and I saw a flicker of something. Guilt, maybe? But before I could say anything more, he held up his hands. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice suddenly defensive. "I saw the account," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I saw your OnlyFans." His face went pale, and for a moment, there was a long silence. He didn't know how to respond. I watched as his mind scrambled, trying to come up with an explanation. "You saw that?" he finally asked, his voice faltering. "How long have you known?" "I just found out tonight," I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I intended. "You've been hiding this from me? For how long?" He opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first. The realization seemed to hit him. "It's not what you think," he said quietly, his voice shaky. "I never wanted you to find out like this." "Then why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, the question bubbling out of me. "Why keep it a secret?" He sighed deeply, rubbing the back of his neck. "It wasn't like that," he said, avoiding my gaze. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. It just happened." The words didn't make any sense. I felt like I was suffocating. How could he say that? How could he try to justify this? I took a step back, trying to control my emotions. My whole world had just tilted on its axis, and everything felt like it was crumbling around me. I was still in shock, still processing what had happened. He was standing there, his eyes avoiding mine, and I couldn't figure out what to do. How could I have been so blind? How could he have been hiding this from me for so long? I wanted answers, but I didn't know if I could handle them. "Tell me everything." It all started on a random Tuesday night. I had been scrolling through my phone, mindlessly, when a notification popped up. It was one of those random social media recommendations, an account I hadn't noticed before. The name was unfamiliar, the pictures were bold, but nothing seemed too out of the ordinary at first. I was half paying attention, my mind preoccupied with the usual distractions of everyday life. But something about the profile struck me. The photo, the expression, the way he looked. Wait, the name clicked. It was my husband's nickname. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the image, now realizing this wasn't some random stranger. This was him. There he was, staring back at me in ways I had never imagined. The familiar smile, the way his hair was styled just so. But what stood out the most? The context, the angle, the setting. He was wearing nothing but a towel, positioned provocatively in a way that made my stomach twist with confusion. Could this be some kind of parody account? A joke? I clicked through to see more. It wasn't a mistake. These weren't accidental uploads. He had a full collection of photos, each more intimate than the last. I couldn't understand it. He'd always been so private. How was this possible? I stared at the screen, unable to make sense of it. I felt a tightness in my chest, my pulse quickening. This wasn't just a fluke, I realized. It was deliberate. I had no idea how to process this. He had a hidden life. A life I had no part of. A life I never suspected. I sat there, numb, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Each post felt like it was mocking me. The comments, the way people were responding to him, it felt wrong. I couldn't even comprehend why he'd never told me. He'd always been so open with everything. Or so I thought. My mind raced, filling with questions I didn't want to ask. Why did he do this? Why was he sharing himself with the world in such an intimate way? Was he trying to hurt me? I clicked through the photos again, my fingers shaking. Some of them were tamer, but others were explicit. My stomach churned. Did he want attention? Or was there something more? I had never seen him like this. I didn't know this side of him. I kept scrolling, unwilling to stop, even as my heart sank deeper. I didn't know how much more I could take. My phone buzzed in my hand, snapping me back to reality. A message from him. Hey, what's up? The message was so normal, so typical of him. It made me feel sick. How could he be so calm? Did he have any idea what I just found? I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I checked his profile again. This time, something caught my eye. His bio. It said, "Thanks for your support, babe." My world tilted. It was like a punch to the gut. The realization hit me harder than anything else so far. He wasn't just posting for strangers. He was posting for me too. He had kept this secret for months. The worst part? I had unknowingly been his biggest fan. I had supported him all along without even knowing it. I had no idea what to do next. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship was crumbling in front of me. My hands felt clammy, my thoughts racing as I tried to find some kind of explanation. But there was none. Just a dark, cold reality staring back at me from the screen. The next few minutes felt like a blur. I closed the app, but the image of his face, so familiar yet so foreign, wouldn't leave my mind. My heart pounded. I had to confront him. But how? How could I even begin to ask about this? How could I bring up something so intimate, so private, when I hadn't even been given the chance to understand it? I stood up from the couch, pacing the room. My thoughts were a jumbled mess. I could feel my anxiety building, my hands shaking. Was he doing this for validation? For money? What was the reason? How long had this been going on? The worst part? I felt betrayed. Betrayed in a way I couldn't even articulate. I thought we were open with each other. I thought he trusted me enough to share everything. But he didn't. He kept this hidden, even though I had unknowingly been contributing to his success. I had liked his posts, commented on some of his pictures, sent him encouraging messages. I had been a part of this, without even realizing it. The anger started building up inside me, mixing with the hurt, until it felt like I couldn't breathe. How could he have been so careless, so secretive? I thought I knew him. I thought we were in this together. But now I was questioning everything. What else was he hiding from me? I needed answers, but I was scared of what those answers might be. I had to know. I had no choice but to confront him. I didn't know how to approach him. What could I possibly say? The anger and confusion inside me made it hard to think straight. I wanted to scream, to demand answers right then and there, but I knew it would only make things worse. Instead, I waited until he came home. The evening was dragging on, and every second felt like an eternity. When he finally walked through the door, I froze. He looked so normal, so unaware of the storm brewing inside me. He kissed me on the cheek, as usual. I could barely respond. My body felt stiff, tense, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. How could he act like nothing was wrong? How could he be so unaffected? I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't find the words. But when I saw him start to relax, take off his shoes, and settle into his routine, I snapped. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low but firm. He stopped, his eyes narrowing slightly. "About what?" His tone was casual, like he didn't have a care in the world. That only made my anger grow. "About your secret," I replied, biting back tears. His face shifted, just a little. The calm demeanor he usually carried faltered, and I saw a flicker of something. Guilt? Maybe? But before I could say anything more, he held up his hands. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice suddenly defensive. "I saw the account," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I saw your OnlyFans." His face went pale, and for a moment, there was a long silence. He didn't know how to respond. I watched as his mind scrambled, trying to come up with an explanation. "You saw that?" he finally asked, his voice faltering. How long have you known? I just found out tonight, I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I intended. You've been hiding this from me? For how long? He opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first. The realization seemed to hit him. It's not what you think, he said quietly, his voice shaky. I never wanted you to find out like this. Then why didn't you tell me? I demanded, the question bubbling out of me. Why keep it a secret? He sighed deeply, rubbing the back of his neck. It wasn't like that, he said, avoiding my gaze. I wasn't trying to hurt you. It just happened. The words didn't make any sense. I felt like I was suffocating. How could he say that? How could he try to justify this? I took a step back, trying to control my emotions. My whole world had just tilted on its axis, and everything felt like it was crumbling around me. I was still in shock, still processing what had happened. He was standing there, his eyes avoiding mine, and I couldn't figure out what to do. How could I have been so blind? How could he have been hiding this from me for so long? I wanted answers, but I didn't know if I could handle them. Tell me everything, I said steady. You couldn't trust me with that? It wasn't about trust, he said, shaking his head. I didn't trust myself. I didn't know how to face you with something so shameful. His words were full of self-doubt, and I almost felt pity for him. But the pity quickly faded, replaced by frustration. Shameful? I repeated. Why? Why would you be ashamed of something you chose to do? His lips pressed into a thin line, and I could see him struggling to find the right words. Because it's not normal, he admitted, his voice quiet. I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't think you'd understand. You didn't think I'd understand? I echoed, the disbelief creeping into my tone. So you kept it from me, thinking I'd just walk away? He nodded slowly, his eyes full of regret. I was afraid of losing you. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe through the heaviness in my chest. This wasn't just about the OnlyFans account anymore. This was about everything that had led to it, the fear, the secrecy, the lack of communication between us. This was about the fact that he had felt he couldn't talk to me, and that hurt more than the secret itself. My heart was still racing, but the anger was slowly giving way to something darker, disillusionment. I had spent years building a life with him, believing we were partners in everything. But now, all I could see was a man who had kept me in the dark, living a double life while I unknowingly supported him. Do you even care about me? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. His face faltered, and I saw the guilt in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand, stopping him. No, don't answer that. I can't even begin to process everything right now. I was so tired. Tired of pretending like everything was fine. Tired of pretending like this wasn't a massive betrayal. My body felt like it was shutting down, every muscle tense, my mind reeling. How had we gotten here? How had we gone from the perfect couple to this? I never meant to hurt you, he said again, his voice barely audible. I don't know what I was thinking. I should have been honest from the start, but honesty, I realized, wasn't something he could just pull out of thin air. It wasn't something you could take back once it was buried for so long. I looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like a stranger. I need time, I said, my voice quiet. I can't do this right now. He nodded slowly, his face drawn with regret. Okay, I'll give you time. Whatever you need. I walked past him, feeling like my whole world was crumbling around me. I didn't know what I needed. I didn't know how I was supposed to move forward. Everything had been a lie, a carefully constructed facade, and I was left trying to pick up the pieces. The days that followed were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. Every time I saw him, every time I heard his voice, I was reminded of the lie he'd been living. I couldn't escape it. He was still the same man, but somehow, everything about him felt different. We barely spoke. He would leave the house in the morning and return in the evening, giving me space, respecting my need to think. But I was still reeling from the discovery. I had tried to go about my day as if nothing had happened, but every time I looked at my phone, I was reminded of the truth I couldn't escape. The truth that my husband had been hiding something so significant from me for so long. Every time I went online, I found myself wondering how many more secrets he was keeping. Was this the only one? Or had there been more? The uncertainty gnawed at me. The worst part wasn't even the account itself. It was the fact that he hadn't trusted me enough to share it with me, to let me in. That hurt more than anything else. I sat down one evening, after a long, empty day, and opened my phone again. I couldn't help it. I clicked on the profile. The posts were still there, still the same pictures, the same captions. He hadn't deleted anything. He hadn't even tried to cover his tracks. I should have felt angry. I should have felt betrayed. But what I felt most of all was sadness. Sadness for the man I thought I knew, and the man he had become. By the time he came home that evening, I had made up my mind. I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that we could just move past this like it was nothing. It was something. It was everything. He walked into the room, his face soft and open, like he was ready to talk, to fix things. But I wasn't ready. "We need to talk," I said again, my voice clear and steady this time. He froze. "About what?" he asked, his tone cautious. "About what happens next." He nodded slowly, sitting down on the couch beside me. But this time, I couldn't sit next to him. I needed distance, both physically and emotionally. "I can't keep pretending," I said, the words flowing freely now. "I can't keep living in this bubble where everything is okay when it's not. You kept this from me for so long, and now I'm left picking up the pieces." "I know," he said, his voice full of remorse. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I never meant to hurt you." But it was too late for apologies. I wasn't sure if I even wanted them anymore. "I need to figure out what I want," I said, my voice wavering slightly. "I need time to think. About everything. About us." He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, his eyes full of pain. "I understand," he said softly. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." But the truth was, I didn't know if I would ever be ready. I didn't know if I could ever look at him the same way again. The days stretched on, and I was still no closer to finding any answers. The more I thought about it, the more confused I became. I felt like I was living in some kind of limbo, trapped between the past and the present. I still loved him, there was no doubt about that. But how could I ever trust him again? How could I move forward knowing that he had kept such a huge secret from me for so long? He gave me space, just like he promised. But every time I looked at him, the image of him I had once loved felt distant, unfamiliar. He was trying, I could see that. He was doing everything he could to make things right. But it wasn't enough. Nothing felt enough. I started to question everything about our relationship. What else had he kept from me? Were there other secrets buried deep beneath the surface? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story. And every time I asked, he seemed to clam up, as if afraid to reveal even more. It was like pulling teeth. I would try to talk to him, to understand, but every conversation felt like a dead end. I wanted answers, but all I got were more half-formed apologies. The worst part was the way he looked at me, like he was waiting for me to forgive him already, for me to just move past it. How could he expect that? How could anyone expect me to just forget this? I was torn between wanting to give him another chance and knowing deep down that I might never be able to look at him the same way again. One night, I decided to confront him again. I couldn't keep living in this uncertainty. I needed to know the truth. "Tell me everything," I said, sitting across from him in the dimly lit living room. His eyes flickered with apprehension. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice careful. I wasn't going to sugarcoat it this time. "I need to know why you did it. Why you kept it from me. Why you thought I wouldn't understand." He sighed deeply, leaning back in his chair. "I wasn't thinking clearly," he said quietly. "I got caught up in it. It started out as something small, something just for me. But then it grew, and I didn't know how to stop it." "And you thought keeping it a secret was the best way to handle it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You thought lying to me was the answer?" He didn't answer right away, his gaze drifting to the floor. "I thought I was protecting you," he admitted, his voice small. "I thought I could handle it on my own. I didn't want you to think less of me. I didn't want you to see me as less than what you thought I was." I felt the sting of his words, but I couldn't let myself get lost in the emotion of it. But you didn't think I'd want to be there for you? You didn't think I'd be able to understand? No, he said, shaking his head. I was scared. I was scared you wouldn't accept it. His words hung in the air, thick with regret. But I was tired. Tired of hearing the same thing over and over again. You should have trusted me, I said, my voice flat now. We could have worked through this together. You didn't have to keep it a secret. That's what hurts the most. His silence was deafening. I could see the weight of his guilt crushing him, but I didn't feel sorry for him. Not anymore. I had been the one left in the dark for so long, the one who had been unknowingly supporting his secret life. Now, I was the one left to pick up the pieces of our shattered relationship. The tears I had once shed felt like they were drying up, replaced by a numbness I couldn't shake. I just don't know what to do anymore, I said, breaking the silence between us. My voice cracked slightly, but I didn't care. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to move on from something like this. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it back before he could touch me. The rejection was clear, but I needed space. I needed time to think, to process. I couldn't let him in right now, not when the walls he had built around us were still standing tall. I know I've messed up, he said, his voice shaking, but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I want to fix this. I don't know if it can be fixed, I replied, my voice steady but cold. Not after everything. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. He looked crushed, his face falling as he processed my words. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Neither of us knew how to cross it. I love you, he whispered, his voice raw, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. But I couldn't make him any promises. I didn't know if I could ever love him the same way again. I didn't know if I could ever look at him and not see the secret he had kept from me. I need time, I said again, my voice quieter this time, almost pleading. I need space to figure out who I am without you. Who we are, if there's even a we left. The following weeks were a blur. He stayed at the house, but we hardly spoke. I felt like I was living in a fog, numb to everything around me. I couldn't shake the image of him, the man I had once trusted, now a stranger. I kept thinking about what had happened, about the lies, the secrecy, and the pain it had caused. Was this the end for us? Could we really go back to how things were before? Or had he permanently changed everything? I spent most of my time in my own head, avoiding any real conversations with him. He tried, of course. He tried to talk to me, to explain himself, but each time, it felt like he was speaking a different language. His words didn't matter anymore. I had heard it all. The guilt, the regret, the apologies. But none of it made me feel better. It only reminded me of how much he had hidden from me. I couldn't let go of the idea that I had been so blind, so completely unaware of the world he had built behind my back. I didn't want to be the person who couldn't forgive, but I also didn't want to be the person who allowed herself to be deceived again. So I kept my distance. I spent time with friends, trying to focus on something, anything, that could distract me from the ache inside. But nothing worked. Every time I came back home, I was reminded of the man who had once been my everything. And every time I looked at him, the emptiness grew a little more. I woke up one morning with the weight of the world pressing down on my chest. The past few weeks had felt like an endless loop of doubt and confusion. It was hard to tell where the truth ended and my own fears began. I hadn't made any decisions yet, but I could feel the walls closing in. There was only so much I could take. I had started going for long walks in the morning, trying to clear my head, trying to piece together the fragments of the life I had once known. But each time, I came back to the same place. I couldn't escape the fact that my husband had hidden something so massive from me. That betrayal gnawed at me every moment of every day. The silence in the house was deafening. The air felt thick, charged with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. He hadn't tried to push me into anything, respecting the space I had asked for. But it didn't make it any easier. The distance between us had grown, not just physically, but emotionally. I had once felt so close to him, like we were a team, partners in everything. But now, I felt like we were strangers. A part of me wanted to scream at him. I wanted to let the anger take over and demand answers, demand that he fix everything. But I couldn't. I couldn't keep pretending I was okay when I wasn't. I couldn't pretend that the love I had felt for him hadn't been tainted by the lies. I couldn't stop thinking about the account, the pictures, the videos, the messages. It was all there, right under my nose, and I had never seen it. I was his biggest fan, and I hadn't even known. That realization hit me again like a slap to the face. I had been supporting him, unknowingly, giving him my attention, my money, my time, and he had been hiding his true self from me the entire time. How could I forgive that? How could I look at him the same way? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the account, saw him, saw the man I thought I knew, but who was really someone else entirely. I felt betrayed, not just by his actions, but by the man I had loved for so long. I felt like I didn't even know him anymore. I had been holding on for so long, waiting for something to change, hoping that the distance would bring clarity. But the more time passed, the more I realized I couldn't keep living like this. The uncertainty, the constant second-guessing, it was all too much. It wasn't just the OnlyFans account. It wasn't just the lies. It was the way everything had become so complicated. It was the realization that we were no longer the couple I thought we were. I needed to decide. I couldn't keep dragging this out, pretending like everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. The hardest part, though, was the love I still felt for him. How could I still love someone who had hurt me so deeply? I kept asking myself that, trying to reconcile the man I thought I knew with the one I had discovered. But nothing made sense anymore. I can't keep doing this, I said one night, sitting down across from him. His eyes widened, as if he had been bracing himself for this moment, but he didn't interrupt. I need to make a choice. I need to decide if I can forgive you, if I can ever trust you again. His face fell, and I saw the fear in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. Let me finish, I said. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know if I can go back to the way things were. And I don't know if I even want to. His lips trembled, and I could see the tears threatening to fall. Please, he whispered. I love you. I know I messed up, but I want to make this right. I want to fix this. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. You can't fix this. Not right away. Maybe not ever. He flinched, but I couldn't stop. I need time to think. I need time to figure out if I can even look at you and not feel betrayed. The words hung in the air, and I could see the devastation in his eyes. But it wasn't his pain I was focused on. It was mine. I had been the one living with the secret, living with the shame of it all. I had been the one who had been deceived. He didn't have to live with that. Not the way I did. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. And maybe he hadn't. But the hurt was there, and I wasn't sure if it could ever go away. The next few days passed in a blur. My thoughts were still consumed by everything that had happened, but I was trying to keep myself busy. I spent time with friends, kept my distance from him, and tried to process everything. It felt like I was living in a different world, a world where nothing made sense anymore. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about the OnlyFans account. It wasn't just about the lies. It was about trust, about the foundation of our relationship being shattered. I couldn't help but wonder what else he was hiding, what else I didn't know. It was a dangerous game, this constant questioning. It made me feel paranoid, as if everything was a lie, as if every little thing I thought I knew about our life together had been fabricated. I couldn't live like this. I couldn't live in constant fear of being deceived. I needed answers, but I didn't know if I wanted them anymore. What would it change? Would the truth make things better? Or would it just break me even further? I kept my distance from him, but I couldn't ignore the tension in the air. We were both walking on eggshells, afraid to say the wrong thing, afraid to make things worse. I couldn't keep doing this. I had to make a decision. I had to decide if I could move past this, if I could ever trust him again. And for the first time, I realized something. I didn't have to have all the answers right now. I didn't have to figure everything out today. I just needed time. The days turned into weeks, and the uncertainty continued to hang over us like a cloud we couldn't escape. I could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of the decision I knew I had to make. Every time I looked at him, I felt a pang of guilt. He was doing everything he could to prove himself to me, trying to earn back the trust that had been shattered. But no matter how hard he tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something fundamental between us. He was still the man I had once loved, but now, he was also someone who had lied to me, someone who had hidden a huge part of himself from me. I couldn't get over it. I couldn't forget the betrayal. I don't know what to do anymore, I said one evening as we sat together on the couch. My voice cracked, and I could see the pain in his eyes. He didn't say anything right away, but I could tell he was waiting for me to say something more, to tell him I was ready to forgive him. But I wasn't. I wasn't ready. I feel like I've been living in this fog, I continued, my eyes focused on the floor. I don't know who you are anymore. I don't know who I am anymore. I feel lost. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it back, not wanting to let him in. Not yet. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think about how this would affect us. But you should have, I replied, my voice firm. You should have thought about that before you did it. You should have thought about me. He lowered his head. His shoulders slumped with guilt. I know. I know. The silence stretched between us again. But this time, it felt different. It didn't feel like we were standing on the edge of something, unsure of what would come next. It felt like we were just two people, both broken in different ways. I don't know if I can forgive you, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And with those words, I felt something inside me crack, something I wasn't sure I could fix. The following days were filled with a kind of quiet tension that seemed to seep into every corner of the house. He didn't leave. He didn't try to push me into making a decision. He just stayed, waiting for me to come to him, waiting for me to make the next move. But I couldn't. I couldn't move forward. I couldn't go back. I was stuck in this painful limbo, where everything was uncertain and nothing felt real. I kept telling myself that I needed to make a decision, that I needed to know what I wanted. But every time I tried, I couldn't picture a future with him. Not like before. Not without wondering if there was something else he was hiding. Every conversation felt forced. Every touch felt like it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. We were existing side by side, but we weren't really living. I couldn't even remember the last time we had laughed together. The last time we had shared something that wasn't tainted by the secrets. I wanted to believe that things could go back to normal. I wanted to believe that we could rebuild. But every time I tried, the doubt crept back in. The fear that I was making a mistake. The fear that I was fooling myself into thinking I could forgive him. I spent a lot of time alone, reflecting on everything that had happened. I thought about the man I had married, the man I had trusted with everything. And I thought about the stranger I had discovered, the one who had kept so much from me, the one who had kept me in the dark. And I realized something. I wasn't just angry at him. I was angry at myself. I was angry for not seeing the signs, for not noticing the small things that might have given me a clue. I had been so focused on our life together, on the love we shared, that I had ignored the cracks in the foundation. I had ignored my own instincts. I couldn't change what had happened. I couldn't undo the past, but I could learn from it. I could learn to trust myself again. And maybe, just maybe, I could learn to trust him again too. But that wasn't something I was ready to decide yet. I woke up one morning with a renewed sense of clarity. I had spent so long dwelling on the past, on what had happened, that I had forgotten what it felt like to just breathe, to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. I had been so focused on the hurt and the betrayal that I had lost sight of everything else. I had lost sight of the woman I used to be before all of this. I needed to find her again, for myself, not for him, but for me. So, I did something I hadn't done in a while. I went for a walk by myself. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and I felt the weight lifting off my shoulders, even if just a little bit. It was the first time in weeks that I felt free. I wasn't thinking about the lies or the secrets or the hurt. I was just existing. And for the first time in so long, it felt good. I realized that I didn't need to have all the answers. I didn't need to know what the future held. All I needed was to focus on what I could control. And right now, that was me. I had spent so much time waiting for him to change, for things to go back to how they were, that I had forgotten what it felt like to take charge of my own life. When I got home, he was sitting in the living room, waiting for me. He didn't say anything when I walked in, but he gave me a look that was filled with hope and desperation. I knew he was waiting for me to make a decision, but I wasn't ready to make one just yet. I wasn't ready to decide if I could forgive him or if we could rebuild. But I was ready to take control of my own happiness again. And that, I realized, was the first step. The weeks that followed were filled with mixed emotions. I felt like I was walking a tightrope between the life I once knew and the one I was trying to create. There were days when I felt strong, empowered, ready to move on, and then there were days when the weight of it all felt unbearable. The questions I had, the ones that swirled around in my head, had no easy answers. Could I forgive him? Could I look past what he had done? Could I rebuild the trust we had lost? The thing was, I didn't know. I wasn't sure I ever would. But what I did know was that I couldn't keep living in this state of limbo. I needed to move forward, whether that meant moving on from him or learning how to find peace in the chaos we had created. One afternoon, I decided to confront him again. The conversation we'd had weeks ago hadn't provided any clarity. It had only opened more wounds. So, I sat him down, determined to finally find some resolution. "I've been thinking," I began, my voice steady but heavy. He looked at me, waiting for me to continue. "I've been trying to figure out if I can forgive you, if we can move past this. And the truth is, I don't know. I don't know if I can ever go back to how things were." His face fell, and I could see the pain in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand, silencing him. "I'm not blaming you entirely. I'm just as much to blame for not seeing it sooner, for not noticing the things that didn't add up. But the fact is, you lied to me, and I don't know how to get past that." The silence between us felt suffocating, but I didn't back down. I had to say what I was feeling, even if it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. "I'm not saying it's over," I continued. "I'm not saying we can't work through this, but I need time. I need space to figure out if this is something I can live with." His eyes softened, and he nodded, tears welling up. "I understand," he whispered. "I'll give you all the time you need. I just need you to know that I love you, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." But as his words lingered in the air, a part of me wasn't sure I could ever trust him again. Not in the way I once had. The foundation had been cracked, and it was hard to imagine it being whole again. But I was willing to take the time to find out if it was possible. I spent the following days reflecting on the conversation we had. His words, the way he seemed so genuinely sorry, made me question everything I thought I knew. Was he really remorseful? Was he truly capable of change? Or was I just holding on to a dream of what we once had? I tried to find peace in the stillness of my own thoughts, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. I saw the man I had loved, and then I saw the man who had betrayed me. It was hard to reconcile those two versions of him. I couldn't help but wonder if the love we had shared was real, or if it was just a facade he had built to hide behind. I tried not to jump to conclusions, but it felt like every step I took forward was immediately followed by 2 steps back. I didn't want to be consumed by doubt. I didn't want to live in a constant state of fear that I was being deceived again. But how could I let go of that fear when it had been ingrained in me for so long? I needed to find a way to trust him again, or at least trust myself. I needed to stop asking myself the same questions over and over again. I needed to stop worrying about the future and focus on the present. For once, I wanted to just live without the weight of the past pressing down on me. It wasn't easy, though. Every time he touched me, every time he smiled at me, I felt a wave of uncertainty wash over me. But I also felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it wasn't too late for us. Maybe we could rebuild, piece by piece. Maybe love could heal the wounds. But I wasn't going to rush it. Not anymore. I spent more time alone in the days that followed, searching for clarity. I had learned that I couldn't make any big decisions until I understood what I truly needed and wanted. I needed to find my center again, to remember who I was without the shadow of betrayal looming over me. So, I did what I knew best. I took a break from everything. I went out for coffee with friends, I read, I worked out, I tried to do things that made me feel whole. Slowly, I began to feel like myself again. Not the woman who had been blindsided by her husband's secret life, but the woman who had been independent, confident, and secure in her own skin. That was the woman I wanted to be again. It wasn't easy to break free from the emotional hold he still had on me, but I knew I had to. I couldn't live my life constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if I was being deceived. And as the days went on, I realized something. I didn't need him to complete me. I didn't need him to validate me. I was already whole. And once I came to that realization, I started to feel a sense of peace I hadn't felt in so long. It wasn't about whether or not we could make it work. It was about finding peace with myself, no matter what the future held. The clarity I had been seeking was beginning to take shape, but it didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a sudden revelation where everything fell into place in an instant. Instead, it was a gradual process of reclaiming my own sense of identity, of rediscovering who I was before all of this started. I realized I had been so focused on fixing my marriage, on trying to repair the damage, that I had forgotten to take care of myself. I had forgotten to nurture my own happiness. But as I spent more time on my own, it became clear to me that I couldn't depend on him, or anyone else, for my sense of fulfillment. I was the one who had to find my own happiness, regardless of what happened between us. One evening, as I sat alone in my favorite chair with a book in hand, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. I thought about the pain, the betrayal, the anger, but I also thought about the love we once shared. I realized that it wasn't just the betrayal that had changed everything. It was my own fear. Fear that I would never feel safe again. Fear that I had been living in a lie all this time. But in that moment, I decided to face those fears head-on. I couldn't keep hiding from them. I couldn't keep running away. The only way forward was to confront the truth, no matter how difficult it was. And the truth was, I wasn't sure if I could ever trust him again. But I also wasn't sure if I was ready to let go of everything we had built together. There were still pieces of us that I held on to, pieces that were worth salvaging. But those pieces weren't enough to erase the hurt. They weren't enough to erase the betrayal. The question was, could I learn to live with it? The decision I had been avoiding was fast approaching. I knew I couldn't keep living in this state of uncertainty forever. Something had to give. But as I faced the reality of the situation, I realized that I wasn't just making a decision about him. I was making a decision about myself. I was deciding who I was going to be moving forward. Would I be the woman who stayed in a relationship built on secrets? Or would I be the woman who finally took control of her own destiny, even if it meant walking away from the person she loved? It wasn't easy to face that truth. In fact, it was terrifying. Because even though I knew I needed to take control, part of me still wanted to believe in the possibility of a future with him. Part of me still wanted to believe that love could heal all wounds. But deep down, I knew that wasn't enough. I had spent too long waiting for things to get better on their own. And now, I had to decide whether I was willing to keep waiting, or whether it was time to let go. It wasn't about the OnlyFans account anymore. It wasn't even about the lies. It was about my own self-worth. It was about whether or not I believed I deserved more than a relationship built on secrets and betrayal. It was about whether or not I believed I was worth more than that. As I sat in the quiet of the evening, I knew the decision I made would shape the rest of my life. But I also knew that I couldn't make it based on fear. I couldn't let fear dictate my future. I had to make this decision from a place of strength, not weakness. The conversation that followed was one I had been dreading for weeks. It was time to finally talk about everything, about the lies, the hurt, and the possibility of a future together. We sat down across from each other, and for the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel comforting. It felt suffocating. He knew what was coming. I could see it in his eyes. He had been waiting for me to make a decision, and now, the time had come. I've been thinking, I started, my voice barely above a whisper. And I don't know how to say this without hurting you more than I already have. He nodded, as if he knew what I was going to say. I don't want to live in this uncertainty anymore. I continued, my heart racing. I don't want to keep wondering if I can trust you. I don't want to keep questioning every part of our relationship. I can't do it. His face fell, the weight of my words hitting him harder than I expected. I understand, he said, his voice barely audible. I never wanted to hurt you, and I'm so sorry for everything I've done. If you want to walk away, I won't stop you. His words were painful to hear, but they were also a relief. He wasn't fighting me. He wasn't trying to convince me to stay. He was giving me the space I needed to make the decision that was right for me. And in that moment, I realized something. The decision wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, and I had already made up my mind. I think it's time for us to part ways, I said softly. I think it's time for me to move on. Walking away from him was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was also the most freeing. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I couldn't keep living in the past. The man I had once loved was gone, and in his place was someone I didn't recognize, a stranger who had kept secrets from me. It wasn't easy to let go. There were moments when I questioned my decision, when I wondered if I had made a mistake. But every time those doubts crept in, I reminded myself of the person I had become, the woman who had finally found her strength, her voice. I wasn't the woman who stayed in a relationship built on lies. I was the woman who chose herself. And that, I realized, was the most important thing of all. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. At times, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But at other moments, loneliness crept in. It was strange not having him around, not hearing his voice or feeling his presence. I had been so used to him being a part of my daily life that his absence was jarring. But in that absence, I also began to rediscover parts of myself I had forgotten. I started spending more time with my friends, reconnecting with the people who had always supported me. I realized I hadn't been truly present for them in a long time. I had been so focused on my marriage, on trying to fix what was broken, that I had neglected the people who mattered most. Rebuilding those connections gave me a sense of comfort, but it also reminded me of what I had lost. Yet, as the weeks passed, I began to understand that it wasn't truly lost. It had simply changed. I had changed, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. I was no longer defined by my relationship, by my marriage, or the secrets it had harbored. I was defined by me. It wasn't always easy to let go of the past, but I learned to appreciate the lessons it had taught me. I had been betrayed, yes, but I had also learned how strong I was. I had learned how to stand up for myself, how to value my own happiness, how to choose myself over everything else. One evening, I sat on the couch, sipping my tea and reflecting on everything that had happened. It still felt surreal, almost like a dream I hadn't fully woken up from. But when I looked around, I saw the changes. I had rearranged the furniture in the living room, changed the art on the walls, and even redecorated the bedroom. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the space feel like mine again. There was no trace of him here anymore. No remnants of the life we once had. It felt like a fresh start. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty about it. I had spent so long thinking that if I let go of him, I would be giving up on everything. But now, I saw that the life we had shared was only part of my story. It wasn't the whole story. There was so much more ahead of me, and I couldn't let the past dictate my future. I smiled as I thought about the possibilities, the adventures I hadn't even imagined yet. It wasn't about finding someone new or filling the emptiness he had left behind. It was about finding myself. It was about embracing the future with all its uncertainty and excitement. And I realized that, despite the heartbreak and betrayal, I had come out stronger. I was no longer afraid of being alone. I was no longer afraid of change. Because, in the end, I was the one who had to live with my choices. And I was finally okay with that. The first time I ran into him after everything had ended was, unsurprisingly, awkward. I had seen his name come up on my phone, and my heart had skipped a beat, but I didn't answer. I didn't want to go down that road again. I had made my decision. So when we crossed paths at the grocery store, I was taken aback. He looked the same. His hair still messy, his eyes still the same shade of blue that I had once loved so much. But there was something different about him now. He looked tired, worn, like the weight of what he had done was starting to catch up with him. We stood there for a few seconds, just staring at each other, before I broke the silence. "I didn't think I'd see you here," I said, my voice calm but distant. He seemed unsure of what to say. "I wasn't expecting to see you either," he replied, his tone flat. The awkwardness hung in the air like a heavy fog. I could feel the tension between us, the years of history that now felt foreign, unfamiliar. "How have you been?" he asked after a long pause. It was a question I had once answered with excitement and love, but now it felt empty. I thought about the weeks of healing I had done, the emotional space I had carved out for myself. I thought about how much I had grown. "I'm doing well," I answered, my voice steady. "I'm finding my way." He nodded, but I could see the sadness in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I never meant to hurt you." It was the apology I had wanted to hear weeks ago. But now, it didn't seem to matter. I had already moved on. "I know," I replied, "but it's too late for apologies." And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving the past behind me, once and for all. The months that followed were filled with small moments of personal triumph. I started focusing on my career again, diving into projects I had neglected when my relationship was consuming my every thought. I began taking trips, going on spontaneous adventures that reminded me how much life I still had ahead of me. I surrounded myself with people who brought out the best in me, people who supported me without judgment. I didn't have to explain myself to them. They simply accepted me for who I was. And for the first time in years, I felt free. But even as I embraced this newfound freedom, there was still a part of me that wondered if I had made the right choice. There were moments when the loneliness crept in, and I found myself longing for the connection we once shared. But I quickly realized that what I had lost wasn't something I needed to hold on to. I had learned to stand on my own, to trust myself and my instincts. And in the end, that was what mattered most. I had come out of this experience stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to create the life I wanted. Not the life I had been given, but the one I had earned. And for that, I was grateful. It had been several months since that fateful day when I walked away from him, and life had begun to find its rhythm again. But it wasn't without its challenges. Even as I embraced my independence, I couldn't escape the occasional pang of doubt. What if I had made a mistake? What if, in leaving, I had let go of something worth saving? These thoughts crept into my mind at the most unexpected times. I would be driving home from work, or sitting at a cafe with a friend, and suddenly, I would wonder if my decision was hasty. Was I just afraid of facing the hurt, or had I truly found the strength to let go? But every time I entertained those thoughts, I reminded myself of the reasons I had made the choice in the first place. I had been suffocated by secrecy, by the betrayal that had shattered the foundation of our relationship. And more importantly, I had learned how to live without depending on someone else to define my happiness. I had learned to be whole again on my own. The truth was, I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. I wasn't afraid of what the future might hold. I had faced my biggest fear and come out stronger for it. The doubt still lingered, but it was no longer paralyzing. I had the tools now, self-love, confidence, and clarity, to move forward with my head held high. One Saturday afternoon, I found myself sitting with my best friend, Kate, at our favorite coffee shop. We were talking about everything and nothing, laughing at inside jokes and reminiscing about old times. But then, Kate asked me a question that made me pause. "Do you ever think about him?" she asked gently. Her tone was thoughtful, not intrusive, but I could tell she was concerned. I had talked to Kate about everything: the heartbreak, the betrayal, the process of healing. She had been my rock throughout it all. But now, after so much time had passed, she wanted to know how I was truly feeling. I took a deep breath and looked out the window for a moment, gathering my thoughts. "I do. Sometimes," I admitted, my voice quiet. "But it's different now. I don't think about him the way I used to. It's more like an echo of the past." Kate nodded, understanding. "You've come a long way, haven't you?" she said, her voice filled with pride. "You're not the same person who was broken by that relationship. You're stronger." Her words hit me in a way I didn't expect. I wasn't the same person, and I hadn't realized how far I had come until that moment. It wasn't about forgetting him. It was about finding peace within myself, even in the midst of uncertainty. I smiled at Kate, feeling a warmth in my chest. "I guess I have," I said, my voice steady. "And I'm okay with that." It wasn't until one late afternoon when I was out for a walk, reflecting on everything, that the full weight of my decision hit me. I had left a part of myself behind when I walked away from him. My former self, the person who had been so willing to forgive, to put up with lies, to believe in the possibility of change. But that person no longer existed, and in their place stood someone who understood her worth, someone who knew what she deserved and wouldn't settle for less. I could feel the difference in the air, the shift in my own energy. I was no longer haunted by the ghosts of the past. I was free. The path ahead of me was still uncertain, but it was mine to walk. And as I looked at the setting sun, I realized that no matter what came next, I was ready. The hardest thing I had ever done was to walk away, but it had also been the most empowering. I had reclaimed my life, my identity, and my happiness. And in that moment, I realized something profound. I hadn't just walked away from him. I had walked into a new chapter of my own life. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected message. It was from him. I hadn't heard from him since our last encounter at the grocery store. My heart skipped a beat as I hesitated before opening it. The message was simple, but it hit me like a tidal wave. "I miss you," it said. "I've made mistakes, and I know I can never take back what I did, but I want you to know that I think about you every day. I'm sorry. I hope you're happy." I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen. His words were filled with regret, but I couldn't help but wonder, did he truly understand the weight of his actions? Did he truly understand the damage he had caused? I had spent so much time thinking about him, about what I had lost, but now I realized something. His apology wasn't enough. It never would be. I didn't need his approval or his regret to validate my decision. I had already found my peace. I had already forgiven myself. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. And I realized that as much as I once loved him, the version of him who had hurt me no longer had a place in my life. I took a deep breath and typed my response. "Thank you for your message, but I've moved on. I'm finding my way, and I hope you do the same." I hit send, feeling a sense of closure. It wasn't the dramatic, emotional ending I had once imagined. It was simple, but it was enough. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely free. It felt like a strange kind of freedom to move on without any lingering attachment. That message from him had been the final piece of closure I needed. There was no lingering, what if or could I have done things differently? I had lived that chapter, and now it was behind me. But I couldn't ignore the deeper feeling that had begun to emerge in me, an almost strange sense of joy in reclaiming my own space in life. It wasn't just about being single or having a fresh start. It was about discovering the parts of me I had buried under the weight of my marriage. Things I had forgotten I enjoyed. Things I had put off because I had spent so much energy trying to fix someone else. For the first time, I truly began to understand who I was outside of a relationship. I booked a weekend trip to the mountains, just to get away, to breathe, and to remind myself that life didn't have to be complicated. It was simple. There was beauty in every moment. The view from the mountain top took my breath away. The air was fresh, the silence calming, and for the first time in so long, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. One night, while I was sitting in my apartment, I received a call from my mom. We hadn't talked much about the whole ordeal with my husband. She'd been supportive, of course, but I knew she was worried about me. "Are you doing okay?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with concern. I smiled, despite myself. It had been a while since I had been able to say those words without hesitation. "I am, Mom," I told her. "I really am." She paused, and I could almost hear her taking a breath. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve to be happy, sweetheart." Her words hit me in a way that surprised me. All this time, I had been focused on the pain, on the betrayal. But now, I realized that happiness was a choice. It wasn't something that just happened. It was something I could create for myself, despite everything I had been through. I hadn't realized how much I had been holding on to the past. But in that moment, with my mother's reassurance, I knew I was ready to fully let go. A few weeks passed, and I threw myself into new experiences, new friendships. I took up painting again, something I had loved as a child but abandoned in adulthood. There was something so freeing about letting my emotions pour onto the canvas. The brushstrokes were my therapy, my way of expressing everything I had buried inside. It was also a way of reclaiming parts of myself that had been buried under the layers of guilt, shame, and pain from my marriage. One evening, while I was working on a piece, my friend Jenna came over to visit. She looked at the painting with admiration. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice filled with awe. "You've really found something special, haven't you?" I shrugged, but I could tell I was beaming. "I think I've found more than just a hobby," I said, my voice steady but filled with newfound confidence. "I think I'm finding myself again." Jenna smiled, wrapping me in a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you." It wasn't the first time someone had said that to me, but for some reason, it felt different this time. I felt proud of myself too. It wasn't long before I started dating again, but this time, it was different. There were no expectations, no trying to fill a void. I was dating for the right reasons, to enjoy the experience, to learn more about myself, to see what else was out there. I met a man named Alex. He was kind, funny, and so different from my ex-husband. He didn't have any hidden lives, no secret accounts, no past betrayals. It was refreshing. Our dates were simple: coffee at a local cafe, walks in the park, and long talks about everything from books to travel to our dreams for the future. It was easy to be with him, and for the first time in a long time, I felt comfortable just being myself. But as much as I enjoyed spending time with him, I also knew that I wasn't rushing into anything. I wasn't looking for another relationship to define me. I was taking things slow, enjoying the moments, without any pressure. Because for the first time in a long time, I was my own priority. As time went on, I realized how much I had grown. The woman who had been devastated by betrayal, who had struggled to find her footing, was now a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she wanted. I no longer needed validation from anyone. I was enough. And that realization brought a peace I hadn't known before. One evening, as I was reflecting on everything, I thought about my ex-husband again. I wasn't angry anymore. The bitterness had faded into nothingness. He had been a part of my life, and I would always carry the lessons he taught me, whether they were good or bad. But now, I realized that he wasn't the person I needed to hold on to. I was the person I needed. I was the one I had to love, to care for, to cherish. I wasn't the same woman I had been when I found his OnlyFans account. I was stronger. I was free. And as I looked out the window at the night sky, I knew with certainty that everything I had been through had brought me to this moment, to this version of myself. And for the first time, I was proud of who I had become. Months passed, and with each one, I grew more confident in my independence. It wasn't just about healing anymore. It was about thriving. I had spent so long being defined by my marriage, by my role as a wife, that I had forgotten how to define myself on my own terms. Now, every day felt like a new opportunity to shape the life I had always dreamed of, but had never allowed myself to fully pursue. I traveled more, spending weekends exploring new cities, finding peace. In the quiet moments, in the bustling streets alike. I reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with when I was caught up in trying to fix a broken relationship. And with every connection I made, I felt more alive, more sure of myself. It was like the world had opened up to me again, and I was finally walking in the light. One evening, while sitting on a rooftop bar with some friends, I was laughing, my heart light with joy. But as I glanced around at the people around me, my friends, strangers, the city, it hit me just how far I had come. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. As the months continued to unfold, I had to admit something to myself. There was a part of me that missed companionship. I had enjoyed the freedom of being on my own, but there were times, late at night, when I longed for the intimacy of someone to share my thoughts with, my dreams. Not for validation, but for connection. I had done a lot of soul-searching, and I had realized that I wasn't afraid of being alone, but I also wasn't afraid of opening up again. One evening, after a long day at work, I found myself talking to Alex. He had texted me just to check in, as he often did, and for the first time, I realized how much I appreciated his simplicity, his kindness. There were no games, no pretenses. It was just easy. "I was thinking about you today," he texted, "and I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner this weekend. Just us. No pressure, just a good meal and some laughs." I smiled at the message. It was so different from the tension-filled dating scenes I'd experienced before. I realized that, for once, I wasn't rushing. I was simply enjoying the moment. "I'd love that," I replied. It wasn't about whether Alex was the one. It was about learning to be open to new experiences, new connections, without the pressure of past wounds holding me back. When the weekend finally arrived, I found myself looking forward to the dinner with Alex. It wasn't just the food or the setting. It was the ease of it all. There was something so refreshing about being with someone who wasn't weighed down by secrets, by baggage. As we sat at the table, sharing stories and laughter, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. This was what it was supposed to feel like: simple, genuine, fun. No games. Just two people enjoying each other's company. At one point, Alex looked at me, a smile playing at the corner of his lips. "I'm really glad we're doing this," he said. "You've been through a lot, and I admire your strength." I appreciated his words, but more than that, I realized just how far I had come. I wasn't just strong anymore. I was thriving, and I could feel the difference in every part of my life. There was no more holding on to the past. There was only the present, and the exciting possibility of what the future might bring. Weeks turned into months, and Alex and I continued to grow closer. Our relationship didn't progress with the urgency of something desperate. It was calm, steady, and built on mutual respect. And while I wasn't sure where it would go, I was content knowing that I wasn't rushing into anything. I was still figuring out who I was outside of the relationship I'd left behind, and I wasn't going to sacrifice that for anything. One day, as we were sitting on the couch watching a movie, Alex turned to me with a serious expression. "I really like where this is going," he said, his voice sincere. "But I need to know you're ready for this. I don't want you to feel like you're still holding on to something from your past." His words caught me off guard, but they also made me smile. Because I wasn't holding on to the past anymore. I wasn't defined by it. "I'm ready," I said softly. "I'm ready to see where this goes." It was a moment of clarity for me. I wasn't afraid to move forward. I wasn't afraid to embrace what the future held. I was ready to love again. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted it. And that made all the difference. It was during a quiet evening at home, as I was reading a book, that I realized something important. I wasn't just letting go of my past. I had completely embraced my present. There was no more hesitation, no more fear of what might come. I had learned to trust myself again, and I had learned to trust that whatever came next, I would be okay. The journey hadn't been easy, and I still had moments of doubt. But I had learned that the key to peace was not in waiting for things to be perfect. It was in accepting myself, flaws and all. And that was the most powerful realization of all. As I closed the book and looked out the window at the stars, I realized that the road ahead was full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it would take me. As time went on, I began to experience a quiet kind of happiness, one I hadn't anticipated. Life, in all its unpredictability, had a way of unfolding in ways I never could have imagined. I had moments where I would reflect on the chaos of my past, how I once thought it would consume me, and I couldn't help but marvel at how far I had come. I was living for myself now, something I had neglected for so long. There were days when I would catch myself smiling for no reason at all, just grateful to be where I was. One morning, while sipping my coffee, I thought back to the day I discovered my husband's secret OnlyFans account. It felt like a lifetime ago. The hurt, the confusion, the betrayal. It had all been so consuming. But now, I saw it for what it truly was, a turning point. It had been the catalyst that forced me to take a long, hard look at my life, and to finally make the decision to change. It hadn't been easy, but I was grateful for the clarity it had brought. I no longer viewed it with bitterness. Instead, I saw it as the push I needed to finally choose myself. The next few months felt like a series of beautiful, peaceful chapters. Alex and I continued to enjoy each other's company, and I realized that this was the kind of relationship I had always wanted. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. It was real. I could be myself without fear of judgment, and I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. There were no secrets, no hidden lives. He was open with me, and I reciprocated that openness. For the first time in a long time, I understood what it meant to feel truly valued in a relationship. But despite the peace I felt with Alex, I couldn't ignore the lessons I had learned from my past. I had learned that love wasn't about fixing someone else. It wasn't about making sacrifices or losing yourself in the process. Love was about two whole people coming together, supporting each other, and growing together. And that was exactly what Alex and I were doing. We were walking the same path, side by side, but not because we needed each other to be whole. We were walking together because we wanted to. It wasn't long before I realized I was falling for Alex in a way that felt different. It wasn't the rush of passion I had felt in my past relationships. It was deeper. It was more like a slow burn, steady, comforting, and full of potential. I didn't have to question whether he was being honest with me or if he had secrets hidden away. He had nothing to hide, and that was such a relief. I remember one evening, as we were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, he turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You've been through so much, and I just want to make sure I'm not rushing you," he said, his voice gentle. "I'm here for you, however long it takes." I could see the sincerity in his eyes, and it made my heart swell. For the first time, I felt truly loved. I smiled at him, my hand finding his. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." And I meant it. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't scared of getting hurt again. I had learned how to protect my heart, how to love with boundaries, and how to trust myself again. Looking back on everything, on the betrayal, the pain, the healing, I realized that I had come full circle. My journey had taken me through dark places, but it had also brought me to light. I had learned to trust again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I had learned that love wasn't about perfection. It was about acceptance. I had accepted myself, my flaws, my past, and my future. I had let go of the things that no longer served me and embraced the person I was becoming. And in doing so, I had created a life I was proud of. As I stood next to Alex, looking out at the future, I realized that I was exactly where I needed to be. I wasn't defined by the mistakes of my past. I wasn't defined by my ex-husband's secrets or my own insecurities. I was defined by my own choices, by the strength I had discovered within myself, and by the love I had for myself and for Alex. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. And as I walked forward into the unknown, I did so with confidence, knowing that whatever came next, I was ready.